to suit it out at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And put on our big pressure suits. They're bright orange, so that if you had to jump out of the space shuttle partway up and land in your parachute down in the Atlantic, they could hopefully find you out there because you're bright orange, and hopefully sharks don't like bright orange as a flavor. And you walk out of that vehicle, or that building, into your vehicle, which is actually called an Astrovan, comically enough. You get into the Astrovan, all, in this case, 5 of us on my first flight. You drive, and there's police escorts and helicopters and the whole thing, and you come around the biggest building in Florida is right there, the vehicle assembly building, where the Saturn V was put together and where the shuttle's assembled. And then you come around the corner, and in your distance is your spaceship. And for an astronaut, it's an amazing place. It's not an airport or a seaport, it's a spaceport. That's where you leave and come back to the world. And it's a new thing. And so for us, it's almost like a holy place. We're at a spaceport. And come around, and there in the distance is your spaceship, and you drive out towards it. And you notice that everyone else is driving away from it. It's a bomb, basically a huge multi-million-pound bomb sitting on the pad, full of high explosive that you're about to climb onto and ignite, and hope most of the explosion comes out the right direction. You ride an elevator up, and then you go into one at a time into a white room, which is just maybe about as big as this corner right here. Get your suit all put together, big harness, and then you crawl into the spaceship. In the center of that room, there's a hatch about this big around, which is the one that's in the side of the space shuttle. So you get down on your hands and knees, and you crawl in, and the space shuttle, of course, is sitting on its tail. So what would normally be the floor is the wall, and what would be the back wall is the floor. So it's odd. It'd be like getting into your car if someone had parked it like that. So you stand in the back window and you crawl up into your seat and lay down with your back in the seat because you're going to be accelerating that way. And then get all strapped in really tightly. It's a 5-point harness. And there's one astronaut who's been living in there for the last few days because there are about 500 switches in the cockpit of the shuttle. And if any one's in the wrong spot, then could kill you. So we want to make sure that everything is exactly in the right spot. So a person's been in there babysitting the shuttle for 3 days. They strap you in, make sure everything's perfect. My wife had written a note for him to give me, which said, I love you, don't die, or something like that. And then he said, and she gave me a kiss for you too. This is going to be my last memory of her. He gave me a kiss on the forehead. Anyway, and then gathered all his gear, and he hadn't flown in space yet, and so he had a Velcro name tag. I ripped off his Velcro name tag and stuck it to the wall so that it would fly in space. And let's give it to him when we got back. Out he went, closed it up, and then we did pressure checks and communications checks, laying on our back. Time got closer and closer to launch, and the vehicle becomes more and more alive underneath you. 3 minutes before launch, the great big engine nozzles on the back, there's 3 of them, start swinging around to make sure that they work. And the whole vehicle sways like if you've ever gotten on an elephant when it's starting to get up one of those rides. The whole vehicle's like that underneath you. And you can just feel the hum of readiness of this whole human creation that's going to take you from the Earth to the universe. And 30 seconds before launch, it's fully alive and no longer being controlled by the ground. 6 seconds before launch, the engines start to light. And the space shuttle is basically a vehicle strapped to a gas tank. And the gas tank is supported by the 2 rockets. So when the engines in the back of the shuttle start to light, they bend the whole thing because of all that force coming out of the opposite center, opposite of the center of mass. So the whole thing is just bent by the power, 1.5 million pounds of thrust, before we could even have enough thrust to lift off the Earth. And the whole thing is torqued and bent like this, and you feel the whole vehicle sway forward against the metal as a big spring until it comes back to vertical. And we know for sure that those 3 engines are working right, and that's 1.5 million pounds of thrust. And then as it twangs back to vertical, then the 2 solid rockets light, which takes you up to 7 million pounds of thrust. They light with a huge rumble of power and shake, and you know you're going somewhere. And you hope just one of them doesn't light, because that would be a really short flight. But both of them light, and it's an immense amount of power. The acceleration is incredible. We've choreographed everything. The engine's light, you look, you make sure everything's working light. You look left to look and see the launch tower disappear behind the window. And by the time you clear the launch tower, you're already going 100 miles an hour straight up and accelerating like crazy. The engines actually pull back a little bit because the air is thick at first. We actually reduce the thrust so that we don't overstress the whole vehicle. And after 45 seconds, you go through the speed of sound, straight up, accelerating. You know, Chuck Yeager and the whole thing, we're actually go through the speed of sound, accelerating in just 45 seconds. And you're burning fuel at 12 tons a second. It's a ridiculous way to get to space, but it's the only way we know how. A huge amount of power, and the vibration and the intensity of it is it's like being in the middle of a tornado. And its vibration's so hard that you actually have to grab on and pull your head off of the pad to let your neck soak up the vibration so you can even see the instruments in front of you because the vehicle's shaking so heavily, shouldering its way through the atmosphere. In about 70 seconds, you're higher and faster than the Concorde. You're 60,000 feet and twice the speed of sound, accelerating straight up. And in 2 minutes, you're 160,000 feet, 6 times the speed of sound, and now the solid rockets have done their job. They're out of fuel. They explode off. And it's weird because the air is so thin up there. When they explode off, the flame isn't pulled back by the wind. It actually goes out in front of you like a big ball of flame all around your whole vehicle. So you see flame all around the vehicle, the solids come off, and now you're just on those liquid engines pumping the hydrogen and oxygen, and they accelerate you from Mach 6 times the speed of sound, out to Mach 25. So it's like you were sitting in a dragster and someone was just pushing harder and harder and harder on the accelerator as you get squished heavier and heavier and heavier into your seat until we get all the way up to 3 times your weight. So if you're a 100-kilo person, you now weigh 300 kilos, just getting squished in your chair, and you feel the acceleration is incredible because we're trying to target 17,500 miles an hour. And you just get closer and closer to that. The fuel is getting lighter and lighter. The force is heavier and heavier. And so you're just having trouble even inflating your lungs. And finally, after 8 minutes and 42 seconds, the engines come back, they shut off, and you're instantly weightless. Just like that.